Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Good turnout, nice day. And my name is Boyd Hayes. I am the president of the Monterey Bay chapter of the Human Association of USA. And so I'm welcoming you on behalf of our board of directors and also from the Bahá'í faith communities of Monterey County. We're pleased to celebrate Human Rights Day as we have annually. As Christine mentioned, this is the 36th award that's been given. So this is a good tradition and we're going to continue into the future. I want to say a few words about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was enacted by the United Nations 76 years ago. It's a milestone document that sets out the fundamental human rights to be universally protected. And this means that states, nations, have obligations and duties under international law to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. As individuals ourselves, we are entitled to human rights. We also have to respect and stand up for the rights of others. And I'm sure we're seeing many situations these days the need to speak out, and we have good examples of that with us here today, both for the award and for our guest speakers. So the power of the Universal Declaration is the power of ideas that can help change the world, to move forward, to treat people in a better way. They empower individuals and communities for a better tomorrow. Embracing and trusting the full power of human rights is the path to the world we want. So today we'll honor the work of a tireless advocate of the homeless in Monterey County, which is an example of how the power of human rights can be harnessed to provide a pathway to solutions. We'll also consider how conflict in the Middle East is testing the United Nations. After all, we are here to try to support the work of the United Nations as it strives to bring peace, security, and respect for human rights in the region. Now, as the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said, human rights are the foundation for peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. So a big picture, but also states have a responsibility and also individuals. So at the outset, I'd like to recognize and give a shout out to the 7 local community organizations that are co-sponsoring the event. You probably had a chance to talk to some of the representatives out in the foyer, and we hope that many of them you have the opportunity to support their work through MC Gives. So I'm sure you're all aware of the MC Gives campaign that's going on now. So think of them when you think of giving. The co-sponsors are listed in the program, but we did intentionally leave out one by mistake, which is the National Coalition of the Institute of Monterey County. So apologies for that. All of these organizations are active in promoting and defending human rights in our local community, so I'd like to thank you all for your work to build a better local and global community. I'd also like to thank Lisa Wartinger, Victoria Gordon, Christina Wright, Joan Condon, Trav Williams, and all of the volunteers who are here to help with the preparations for this event. And also thank the Unitarian Universalist Church of Monterey County for making this very fine venue available to us, as well as the church administrator, Amy Razak, for her logistical support. So let's give them a round of applause. I wanted to recognize the elected officials who join us today. We have Tyler Williamson, who's the I don't know if Tino Garcia made it or not.
I don't think he has.
He's not here. He was quite here, so give us our regards to him. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize many of the past Human Rights Award recipients who are in attendance. Now, I'm not sure everybody is here. I know Catherine Crockett couldn't make it today, but McGregor Eddy, I know I've seen you many times. Erickson, here you are. Jealous, there you are. Okay, I did want to say a few words about Larry Levine. He's a past award recipient, and he's also past president of our Monterey Bay chapter. Now, as many of you know, Larry is a tireless advocate for the work of the United Nations. He has recently had some health issues, and while he's on the road to recovery, he was not able to be with us today. And he asked me to give his best to all past award recipients and all the attendees here. He told me that this is his first time he's missed the Human Rights Day luncheon since he was elected president of the UNA in 1998. Contacted him directly, so I hope you will also give him your best regards and support. Okay, so our program this afternoon has two parts. First is the presentation of the annual Human Rights Award by the Baha'i Faith Communities of Monterey County. And then we will have a talk by our special guests, speakers Nashwan and Hamza and Seth, Pollack, on Palestine and Israel, a test for the United Nations. So first I'd like to hand over to Matthias Milton on behalf of the Baha'i communities. Matthias.
Thank you for that introduction. The human rights framework, so eloquently given shape by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, marks a milestone in humanity's collective efforts to build a more just and peaceful world. Yet widespread discrimination, oppression, and society's failures to uphold international law result in the suffering of millions and thwart the advancement of humanity. The Baha'i international community believes that human rights achieve their highest expression when understood in the context of human relationships, within the family, the community, the nations, and among the community of nations. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, has stated in the Law Maqsood, "The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens." Viewed through this lens, human rights are a vehicle for all to realize their inherent potential and to ensure the same for others. For more than 70 years, Baha'is have worked with NGOs and collaborated with the UN in an effort to strengthen the mechanisms by which the vision of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights can find full expression. At the international level, Baha'is participate actively in meetings of the Human Rights Council, its special procedures, and the Universal Periodic Review. Our representatives engage regularly with the UN Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, among others, and play an active role in related NGO committees. And at the local level, in Monterey County, Baha'is have served as members of the UNA Monterey Bay chapter. Since 1980, we have been proud to present a Human Rights Award every year in conjunction with this annual luncheon. And now here to present the honoree of the 2024 Baha'i Human Rights Award is Seth Pollack.
Greetings, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you. This is amazing, Rita.
Right?
The last time Rita and I were together, we were walking the streets of Chinatown. Rita was organizing for a fundamental human right, the right to go to the bathroom. Don't we appreciate that as a fundamental human right? As part of the work in Chinatown to help not just house, but really treat people as human beings. We organized the Public Hygiene Lets Us Stay Human, Flush, P-H-L-U-S-H, the local chapter of this national organization, to raise awareness to the need of people for a fundamental human right. This was one of the most growthful times of my life. At least as a professor at CSUMB and director of service learning, we spent about 15 years working in Chinatown with the city, with the county agencies, with nonprofits, most importantly with the people. We were invited in to try to do something. We didn't know what to do. The city had owned a piece of land which was to be housing. They didn't have any money, and there was no developer who dared set foot into Chinatown and invest in what? So we said, well, let's make a garden and see if we can't begin to develop and make visible the life and the opportunity that is here in Chinatown. The garden was created, a community center was created, and then tents next to the garden was created. As people were telling us, nice garden, but we don't have a place to sleep. So the tents at the garden was, I think, my opportunity to begin to get to know the activist that is Rita. What I learned there, and hopefully I'll be able to bring that and connect the dots in the later part of our piece, because I think it's the same thing. Listening is a revolutionary act. What happened in Chinatown was that when we finally had the social capital to attract people to come in and invest in a building, guess what? We had people who lived there who could sit at the table with them and say, here's what we need in our community. We don't need more walls to wall us off. Reference to the Middle East. We don't need walls. Walls don't make people safe. Eyes on the street, connection, and trust make people safe. So it was such an honor to be able to support the work of people like Van and Rita and the community there, to have a voice in the process. So today there's no more garden in Chinatown. But what is there? There's 70 units of supported affordable housing. It's where Rita and family live. Rita Acosta is a resident of Salinas. She's committed her life to the service of others. She's been a voice for those who suffer in silence, while advocating for the families who are system impacted. She continues to be there for those who have no support. Especially when dealing with death, she's been there for others when they wanted to give up. She's provided many years of exemplary service to humanity in Monterey County, especially members of Salinas' unhoused community. Rita is one of Salinas' greatest unsung champions. Rita and a group of other homeless activists organized Tents by the Garden and the Flush campaign, and in 2020, Rita collaborated with the Salinas Living Poetry and Prose Project to write and publish her memoir, Making a Difference, a narrative and photo documentary of her work. Unfortunately, once the area was cleared, leaving the participants back on the streets, Rita's observation was that it wasn't a failure, but proof that people can organize for better lives. And that step, I could say, organizing Tents in the Garden was like putting the cornerstone on the building that now exists today. Rita, that wouldn't have happened without your work and without your commitment to the community. When I look at this list of luminaries, these are the leaders of our community who've given so much and made our lives so much better in our county. And it's such an honor, Rita, to add you to this list and to bring you up here for this very deserved award. Rita Acosta.
I am Rita Acosta. I just want to say thank you. It's an honor to be receiving this award. I'm still shocked. I can't believe I'm here. Yeah, it's been hard, but got to meet a lot of nice people on the way. I don't even know what to say really. Yeah, but it's good. I mean, it was real hard, but we did it together with the community. Van also. Wes White, Hamza, Wesson, Dredd. It's really hard right now, and it's continue even being even more harder the way things are. Change. I guess people just think if you're homeless that you have no say or you like living like that. That's not what it is. But as we know, the economy's really everything's changed. It's expensive, hard to live. Housing. Rent is so high, people can't even afford to live, even if you have a job. So if you're homeless and trying to get on your feet, how hard is that going to be? Even more so, you know. And I just like to tell everybody, just you know, people don't like living like that. It's, you say it's not really a choice because there's not really services for people. You know, our cities are working on it. People have got housed, but there's just so many homeless out here that there's not enough services. You know, we need more people to come to the communities and at least talk to people, because everybody needs somebody to talk to. You know, giving a jacket or something, that's nice, but for real, people need somebody to talk to, because it gets really lonely out there. There's a lot of people lose their families. When I was out there, my family wasn't too happy with me being out there, but I was trying to show them and myself I could do it and get back on my feet, you know. But I ended up out there homeless. I had my 2 chihuahuas, so they didn't let me stay at the shelter, so I got a tent. I started speaking for people, and I went to city council and said I was homeless, and my kids and friends, we just seen your mom on TV and she said she's homeless, and all of a sudden I had them out there, Mom, what are you doing out here? I'm just like, trying to live, you know. But I think if we put our minds to things that we really want to make change, we can do it working together, you know. I hear all the time, homeless, or you ain't got money, you're just supposed to accept what they give you, but it's not so. We're us as human beings, if we tell them what we need or work on getting it ourselves, it's more important, because then that makes us appreciate it more. But by all means, nobody likes living in a tent. Nobody likes going to the restroom in a bucket. Having people look down at you and stuff because they say it costs nothing, but it does. Self-respect, dignity, the way people, I mean, it's not nice, it's not fun. You see people laughing at you and stuff. I had people throw food at us. Oh, you're hungry, here, throw it. I'm like, boy, they're really, to me, that's evil. You know, somebody says they're hungry, are you going to throw them food like they're an animal? You know, we treat our pets nicer, you know, and I don't know when we became a town or city or it's okay to treat people the way we do. I don't think it's right if somebody doesn't have a home that we're going to look down on them. When I was homeless, nobody even believed I was homeless. Like, you can't be homeless. I'm like, what is a homeless person supposed to look like? You know, so, I mean, homeless is not somebody that's all dirty or, you know, we just don't have a home. It just upsets me because we just had a sweep yesterday in Salinas. And I mean, I see them take so many people's property. When you see a grown person crying because they've lost their stuff again, it's sad. Because you know tonight's going to be really cold. And the city just came and picked up their tent, their blankets, all their survival tools that they need to be out there. And what does one do? I told the cop, so what are you going to do tonight? Well, he's just going to have to figure it out. Wow, you just took all his stuff and that's what you have to say? Aren't the police supposed to protect and serve our community? Right. Like, oh, I forgot, not the homeless community. You know, because that's what it feels like. We're, you know, I always say it's a war on the poor. You know, because we're the ones who are suffering out there. We get all nonprofits, sorry, but we just put more money in their hands, and people, some do get housed, but not as much as it should be. You know, and I think if they say they're going to do certain things, they should do it, because that's what they get their money for. And people are dying on the streets, and we deserve better. You know, as human beings, we should want more for our fellow person. That, you know. It's an honor to be getting this award. Again, Seth and Bill Black at the time were at the Learning Center, the CSUB Learning Center, and they were doing a survey where everybody went to the restroom asking, where do you go to the restroom at? Because after hours, Dorothy's is closed, so there's no bathroom. So we'd go looking around here and there to see who would let us use it, but business owners didn't really want the homeless in there. So I'm like, so where do we go? They're like, get a bucket. I'm like, oh my God, we need to get a porta potty. There's no more. I mean, when I had to first use it, I started crying. I'm like, I'm broken now. You know, I never thought in my wildest dreams I would have ended up homeless. But I did. I mean, I had my 2 dogs, I was in the shelter. So what does one do? So that's why I say, so the person's out there, it's not because they want to. Sometimes they have no choice. You know, and again, it's just like, the way things are right now, we say for other cities, we're like, God, it's so bad for them over there. How are they going through that? And how do they get through that? Or how do they live like that? Well, that's happening right here in our own backyards. You know, and we need to concentrate and think how we can help our neighbors instead of saying we don't want them here or anything. If we really think about it, I think we could fix the problem. I'm not saying overnight, but we could do a lot in with the homeless. If we, you know, invest the money on things that really need it, instead of saying sweeps, let's put people indoors, so this way you don't have to have all those sweeps. And if people have organized space, then you make rules, they have to throw the trash, so there's not all that garbage. But if people are someplace, you know there's gonna be trash. So why don't we provide trash cans? And if you don't want people to be using the restroom everywhere, where's the porta potties? We could invest in stuff like that instead of sweeps, because it's like $15,000 a sweep, and we were having one every week, so that's like $60,000, you know, a month to move people out of the way and to take their property. I don't think that's right. To me, that's a waste of taxpayer dollars, you know, because it's going to happen again next month and again the following month. So I mean, that money could be used to invest in housing, low-income housing and stuff, you know. I don't know, I don't even know what more to say. I'm just trying to think of throwing everything out real quick. But, you know, actually I was surprised too, because I'm used to going someplace where they say, oh my God, there's Rita Acosta and West White. What are they going to complain about now? Here, and even like, oh, nice to meet you. It's like, God, I felt nervous. Used to be, yeah, well, here they are again. West with his camera and me with my mouth, you know? So, yeah.
Rita, thank you so much. That was incredible. It's just been such a pleasure getting to know you and getting to know your work.
And your book make a difference. That I pointed out to you that the city had just torn up the fencing camp and cleared the ground, and you had a rather unusual response. Could you repeat that?
Well, I thought that we failed. It's just we showed them that we were organized.
They didn't fail. They proved they could do it. God bless you, Karen.
First, from the Baha'is of Monterey County, we have a nice little gift card from Downtown Book and Sound. So, woo! Also have the actual award. It exists. And from Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren, we have a recognition as well. And from the California State Senate, the recognition. Yes, as well as the chair of the County of Monterey Board of Supervisors. And then the Speaker of the Assembly as well.
All right, well, hopefully that's quite a recognition, Rita.
Yes,
and,
it is.
Thank you very much for the work that you do in Salinas and Chinatown. Well deserved. I'd like now to move on to the next part of our program, which are our two guest speakers, and they come as a package. So Nashwan, Hamza, and Seth, Pollack. Just let me say I had not met them before this meeting and didn't have a chance to talk too much over lunch. We had a chance in the beginning. We have some things in common. Seth and I were both in the Peace Corps, for example, in Central Africa, so that's very nice. And Nashwan, working in originally marine biology. I'm also a biologist by training, so paths crossed. But what stands out in their bios, which are in the printed program, is their commitment to cross-cultural interfaith dialogue. So Nashwan is an Iraqi-born Muslim American, spent his career in architectural design and construction, and you may have seen some of his work around the Monterey, Carmel area. He also co-established the Arab-Jewish Dialogue Group and Interfaith Group, both as a venue for difficult conversations between cultures and religions and to answer questions on pressing societal issues. And in the bio he gave us, which did not put in the program, he said his self-declared greatest accomplishment is having married a Catholic and raising 3 broad-minded children in a multi-religious household. I can empathize because I also married a Catholic and I'm not. I understand. And Seth, after a decade of working in international development and doing, I think, some really good work there in your studies, you have had a long academic career, mainly at UNAMB, which is our local homegrown university. I think we all should be proud of, as well as several academic sojourns in Africa and Europe. He's made significant contributions to integrating service learning with issues of diversity and social justice in higher education curriculum. And that's a lot of words. I used to work at the UN. We called it learning by doing, and trying to work yourself out of a job if you were an educator. His current focus is on building dialogue within the Jewish American community to bring about a future of security, dignity, freedom, and self-determination for all Palestinians and Israelis. So Nashwan and Seth are friends and collaborators, so we're very pleased to have them here together. And they will speak about how the latest conflict between Palestine and Israel is a test for the United Nations. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and they're going to manage this session up until the end. So please, Seth and Nashwan.
Thank you, Boyd, so much for that introduction, and I want to thank Charles Fuller and the United Nations Association Board for allowing us to be here and for the invitation. I actually was able to meet Charles through an organization that we both belong to called the Community of Interfaith Colleagues, which was an interfaith group that we belong to with some other members of the Baha'i faith here are also part of. And what we did is we were members of various faith communities that got together to address social issues. And we addressed those social issues based on whatever faith we belong to and how that faith would view it. Issues such as women's rights or abortion or homosexuality, you know, light stuff, you know, that we just don't talk about. But I also reflect upon verses from the Quran which says, if God had wanted us to be one faith, he would have made us one faith. And also he made us into tribes and nations so that we get to know one another. So again, that ties in with our interfaith community. But the topic today is about Palestine being a stress test for the United Nations, another light subject. But first, if I could, I'd like to share with you a few words about my journey with this topic and how that journey has led me to my views regarding the realities of what's happening in Palestine today. If you ask me what things have contributed to my understanding, I would say that over my lifetime, it's been through the slow piecing together kernels of truth extracted from mountains and mountains of deception. As an Iraqi-born immigrant who was raised in a multilingual, multicultural household, which I actually truly cherished as having given me the ability to see the world through two sets of eyes, the difficulty arose early on during my youth. From coming to realize that some of my American friends and colleagues would view me as somehow a potential threat. And when you live with having to wonder how every new person that you meet may be thinking about you, you're left with the need to find answers. And those answers actually came to me pretty quickly. American perception of the Arab man was being framed by the violent realities of Arab resistance to colonization and to occupation, especially in Palestine. This was a time, as you remember, when planes were being hijacked and suicide bombings were frequently reported in the news media. News that seemed to always leave out the full context. Some things never change. And that led me to try to speak out. And the first opportunity I had that I was reflecting on was, again, a long time ago, that happened in this very religious institution, the Unitarian Universalist Church. And at that time, the Reverend Margaret Kipe invited me. And in talking with her about what I was going to be speaking about, I said, well, how about we talk about how we view the other, and our perceptions and how they may mislead us into how we view the other, either with a religious individual, ethnicity, culture, whatever it may be. So I decided I would be a little dramatic about it. I was young at the time and didn't know how to really approach it. So I decided to put on the full Arab regalia, that how men traditionally wear. And I put on my thickest Arabic accent and I came and spoke before the group. And back then I came and I approached them, and the majority of them had no idea who I was. So of course they took me at face value as being a local, but a very ethnically and Arab-related individual. And it was a really quite dramatic experience in that I spoke to them throughout the majority of it in the headdress as well as the thick accent. But as time passed, I slowly started to remove it. And then my accent started to drop. So by the end, I was speaking to them as I'm speaking to you today. And the reaction was remarkable. Because just like I'm witnessing you now, I was able to see their reactions and their mouths agape, their eyes widened, smiles on their faces. And I asked them, how did you view me before and how are you viewing me now? And I think they understood. I think they got it. Over the years, I spent a lot of time in both individual and group discussions about the topic of occupied Palestine. And it's been truly rewarding, especially in the friendships I've made, some of which are here in this room today. But it's also been extremely frustrating. Frustration stemming from people's perception that it's a complex issue, or that it's an ancient issue. Frustration from what I perceived as people's inability to understand simple cause and effect. In dialogue, its value lies in attempting to understand the reasoning behind our beliefs, and how our beliefs might be hindering us from understanding others. Our beliefs are nuanced, no doubt, and they're influenced by many factors. Yet with regards to our perception of Palestine and Israel, I found that the greatest roadblocks to seeing the other as coming from the values we place on those issues, on those beliefs. If they're important enough, it doesn't seem to matter if they're true or not. And we will defend them regardless. In science, we have theories. And when those theories are challenged and found to be incorrect, we typically don't have an issue in adjusting and moving on to new information. It's not personal. When it comes to nationality, ethnicity, and religion, we make them personal. However, when the defense of our perceived values obscures us from seeing or acting on harm being committed to others, the need for more direct language and action take precedent. Having spent over 14 months now reading about and witnessing through social media the unspeakable horrors that have been unleashed on Palestinians, requires me to say that for me and for countless millions of others, the time for sensitivity and discourse when it comes to Palestine needs to take a back seat. The time for asking for balanced dialogue is over, because there is no balance. When you have a state that is sanctioning human slaughter, live streamed onto the world against a people who are placed into a barbed wire concentration camp and bombed, while the world leaders are not only ignoring but actually funding and cheering on, there becomes no more room for holding of one's tongue out of fear of offending or risking alienation. The only thing remaining to do is to shout out to the truth to anyone and everyone. Because it's been in the obscuring of truth that has led us to this disaster. Let me repeat that. It's been in the obscuring of truth that has led us to this disaster. When you yourselves are having witnessed this suffering and death, and while discussing it with your friends and colleagues, you may hear and you find yourselves even saying, but what about Hamas? Or what about Israel's right to defend itself? Or any other justifying rebuttal that you may be saying or thinking, I respectfully say that you need to be checking your moral compass. Because as human beings, we must collectively acknowledge that there are no questions to be answered, no concocted stories to tell that can in any way justify genocide. Every national and internationally recognized humanitarian agency, along with every internationally recognized legal body, have been chronicling and condemning what they all recognize as crimes against humanity. International doctors and humanitarian aid workers who risk their lives by going into Gaza are all speaking publicly to us, saying that the conditions that they have witnessed, they have never before seen in any war zone. And we, the citizens of a country that supports this massacre, have the audacity to show doubt towards its voluminous collective evidence. Evidence which has led the International Criminal Court to issue warrants against those that it deems responsible. The importance of rules-based systems cannot be overstated. I believe that there are three types of laws that humanity has chosen to govern themselves by: religious laws, national laws, and international laws. Collectively, they constitute the structures that we rely on to protect ourselves from the laws of the jungle. And the manipulation and degradation of any one of these sets of laws can slowly undermine all the others. When it comes to the issue of Palestine and Israel, the manipulation of these laws by their leaders and followers has been quite remarkable. Let's take a moment and look at how these three sets of laws are being subverted. Religious laws help guide both the individual and society, and we have to acknowledge that much good has come from their adherence. However, in our lifetimes, we are witness to the most egregious manipulations and violations of what most of us would consider to be an affront to the foundational principles of these religions. For example, when the followers of a religion promote their religion or ethnicity to be superior to others, and then to state it as being sanctified by God. When religious leaders preach the uprooting and destruction of another race or faith as being necessary for the salvation of their own followers. And when religious leaders not only turn a blind eye to the killing and suffering of their own, but actively take part in it, then it becomes no wonder that respect for religious institutions as a whole has eroded. In fairness, there are many adherents of these faiths who oppose these transgressions. However, opposition is not passive. It requires denouncing those within their own flock who misrepresent them. The Pope himself has come out and said that the world needs to look into Israel's genocide. The Islamic world's 1.7 billion followers have condemned the apartheid state along with their own complicit Muslim dictators who cowardly stay silent. And the countless rabbis and Jewish scholars condemn the Israeli state for committing these atrocities in their name. Regarding the erosion of our own U.S. national laws, much of our country is already of the opinion that our laws favor the ruling class. I remember President Obama, when he addressed the nation regarding why no banking official ever went to jail for the 2009 banking crisis, he said, What they did may have been immoral, inappropriate, and reckless, but it was not illegal. A State Department report looked at two key questions: whether Israel has violated national law while using U.S. weapons, and whether Israel is restricting humanitarian aid. On both questions, the response was a weak-throated but definitive yes. And yet, the State Department dismissed it, and Congress continued its funding of shipment and weapons. A policy decision that is shown to be violating 5 of our national laws. Laws that previous administrations created to prevent government from doing exactly what it's doing now. In addition, our government, who in the past has allowed Nazi Party members and KKK members to march in the streets shouting their reprehensible views, citing the constitutional right of free speech. That same government is now repressing American defenders of human rights with new laws on the books, along with laws in the process of being codified, to arrest college students, professors, academics, workplace organizers, and everyday people in the streets, all with the intent of suppressing free speech that is in opposition to a foreign state committing illegal and morally reprehensible acts. Fealty to a foreign state is undermining Americans' respect for our own government. Someone once said, "The moral universe is not housed within our leaders, but within us. And if we give that up, what is left of us is a human shell." Regarding international laws, at the end of World War II, the world put together a body of laws that was designed to combat crimes that were so horrific that the world codified them as crimes against humanity. Ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide are all codified crimes which are recognized by international agencies as having plausibly occurred in Palestine. As a consequence, in July of this year, the International Court of Justice handed down a historic ruling. A ruling that, by the voluminous evidence of Israeli actions, has allowed the ICJ to declare that Israelis' prolonged military occupation is in fact illegal, and as such ordered them to dismantle every settlement, to remove every soldier from occupied territories, to remove the wall, the right of return of Palestinians to their ancestral homelands, the payment of reparations, the declaration that Israel is practicing apartheid, and that the international community must band together to oppose them through any and all means at their disposal. Further, the General Assembly took up every line of that in September and adopted an implementation resolution, one that 124 countries voted for. Yet again, the United States, who is standing in the way of international law by ignoring United Nations resolutions and threatening other countries to do as well. We've been exposed. We've been exposed of no longer being the leaders of the free world, but rather to being the leaders of the freedom to do whatever the hell we want world. Both the United States and Israel are at a crossroads. One that asks us to choose between acknowledging our current and past realities or to continue to suppress and alter them. A large segment of American citizens today do not want to accept our history of colonization and extermination of indigenous and Native Americans, nor of enslavement of black human beings. They want to erase that reality from our collective minds and our children's history books. In occupied Palestine, European Jews who immigrated there are also at a crossroads. The realities of what has occurred during their own lifetimes is also not taught in Israeli schools. Realities that have been exposed to them more recently through Israeli historians and scholars. Realities by which ignoring of their own history has brought to them. In both countries, the crossroads is asking us to choose. To choose to see truth or to choose to bury it and continue on with our self-anointed exceptionalism. So, what does a stress test do? A stress test exposes weaknesses in a system. I am often puzzled whenever acts of violence are committed in our own country. I often hear people saying, "This is not who we are." In reality, these moments are mini stress tests that temporarily open windows to expose what we have actually become. Palestine has given us such a window that allows us to see when laws are created to protect government as special interests and to quiet public dissent. It is a gift to us and the world, a gift that's been paid for with blood, that is asking us to not pass up this moment in history to better ourselves as a nation. In my opinion, all of you who are members of the United Nations Association, along with all of your chapters around the country, also have a unique role to play. You are by design a supportive body of the United Nations Charter, and as such you become a great humanitarian lobbying group, one that can voice its collective concerns directly to the UN ambassador, as well as to Congress and even local elected officials. There's power in numbers. And that leaves you with this final question. If the UN bodies fail in their attempt to convince member countries to carry out justice, and as a result the world loses all faith in them, what then will this association actually be in support of? And with that, I thank you and I invite my brother to come up and thank you.
I really do want to thank Nashwan for inviting me. He was reached out to by the UNA and he said, Seth, let's do this together. So here we are. We don't agree on everything, but one thing we agree on is that we're brothers. We have shared values, so respect, dignity, and the fact that in every human being there's what we call B'Tselem Elohim, a little spark of the divine. In everyone. And we want to hold on to that. So I want to give you a bit of a background to my own journey, both my Jewish faith tradition journey as well as my relationship to Israel-Palestine. Because as Jewish Americans of an era, those two things are very intertwined. I was born in 1958 in New York City, 10 years after the foundation of the State of Israel. My parents were both first-generation Americans, immigrants from Poland or Russia or what we would call Galicia, but what's now known as Western Ukraine. They came to the U.S. in the early 1900s, escaping violence and pogroms and repression that was common in the area known as the Pale of Settlement, which was the only area where Jews could live in the Tsarist Russian Empire. Ironically, to answer the question, so where are you from? Was always complicated. Still is. I'm not Ukrainian. Ukrainians would tell me, you're not Ukrainian, or Polish, or Russian. Who are you? In 1969, my parents made the migration west, leaving the Jewish ghetto of New York City for Boulder, Colorado. I was 11. And I went from being a taken-for-granted member of a Jewish community, because everyone we lived in our neighborhood was Jewish, to the only Jewish kid in our high school. My father, who had retired as a high school teacher, found a synagogue that had just been built and no rabbi, and he stepped up, and until his passing, he was the leader of our community. I learned from him that you fight ignorance and hatred through connection and building bridges. The second real formative experience in my Jewish upbringing was living in Mali, West Africa, for 5 years in the Peace Corps and doing other development work. Mali's an Islamic country. 90% of Malians are Muslim. And one of the most profound impacts of those 5 years was the lessons, the deep lessons I took from the beauty, the spiritual beauty, the faith tradition beauty, the respect for humanity that I felt as a result of living in this Islamic community. And when I left Mali, I came on my own journey to grow up as a Jew. I felt like I was a spiritual pipsqueak. And that propelled me to discover what is in my faith tradition, and what are the values that I seek to live out in my life? So what does this have to do with Israel-Palestine? Well, for our generation of Jewish Americans, let's call it the post-Holocaust baby boomer Jewish kids, as Eric Alterman writes in his 2024 book on the history of Jewish political relations with Israel, he says, to be Jewish, quote, in America it meant two things: never forget the Holocaust and always support Israel. I remember maps of Israel on our Sunday school room walls. I remember donating money for trees to plant in Israel to green the desert. I remember the '67 war and the pride we felt and how that really transformed. It felt like our relationship to this place and the identity of what it meant to be Jewish. No longer the kind of, glasses and book-bound kid, but like this vigorous hero, military fighter, macho man who could, like, in 6 days defeat all those armies. We wanted that. And we could get that. Why? Because in 1950, 2 years after the creation of the State of Israel, the law of return was passed, which said if any Jew wants to come to Israel, you can become a citizen like that. Just prove that your mother or you are Jewish. So I did. In high school, after high school, before college, I went to Israel for 6 months. I lived on a kibbutz, a communal farm, near Haifa on Mount Carmel, not Carmel, Mount Carmel. And met young people from all over the world, met Arab youth who we worked with. Many of the Americans stayed, made their lives there, and are citizens of Israel to this day. It never really crossed my mind how the right of return, which the refugees who lost their homes in the Battle of Independence received no right of return, whereas the law of return allowed me to show up and become a citizen. That never crossed my mind. To us children of the post-Holocaust generation, Israel was a miracle. Finally, a place of safety, a homeland where we could belong and where we can live without persecution and without fear of violence or worse. Again, that the birth of Israel could be seen as miraculous to me and could be seen as the Nakba, the catastrophe, to my Palestinian friends and family, never crossed my mind because I never heard that word. Of course, that youthful vision of Israel changed over the next 57 years if we count from the 1967 war. We have 57 years of occupation. And working at CSUMB in social justice and community work and diversity, when I left there in 2020, I said, I need to take on a new project. I need to relearn and engage with this part of our history, which I've never really wrestled with. And thanks to people like Nashwan and amazing resources out there, I started to relearn and re-educate myself. I learned about Zionism, which to me was just this fluffy term of, we need a place. But learned that, there was many diverse forms of Zionism, including some Zionism that felt very much like ethnic cleansing Zionism. And there were other Zionisms that were like, okay, we could be good neighbors too, can't we? I learned about the tensions and animosities that was growing as hundreds of thousands of European Jewish immigrants came in this massive wave of, I'll just call it Jewish gentrification. And they weren't always the best of neighbors. And they weren't always well received. I learned about the War of Independence, the Nakba, and learned that 750,000 Palestinians did not just leave their homes voluntarily at the encouragement of the leaders of the invading Arab armies, which is what we had heard. Oh yeah, all those people, they just left knowing that once the war was over, they'd come back. That's not what happened. Hundreds of villages were decimated, massacres happened, and people were forced to flee. And on the ruins of those villages, Israeli towns were built. I learned that it's not solely the Arabs who never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, which was the famous, often repeated line of Foreign Minister Ibn in 1973. Arabs, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Implying what? Oh, we're always ready to deal and negotiate and make peace. And the Israelis are at least, I have learned, equally good at missing opportunities, if not even worse, actively sabotaging opportunities for peace. And in fact, the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative was never responded to by the Israeli government. It's still on the table. It was just raised in the past months as a proposal for peace. Learning about the ongoing humiliation, injustices, and misery that millions of Palestinians are experiencing, have been subjugated to in the past 57 years. The humiliation of living, having to cross borders and show your certificates, and the humiliation of daily life. We have family friends who live in Hawara on the West Bank. Hawara was the place where a couple of years ago there was the first time the Israeli government used the word pogrom as settlers, as Jewish extremist settlers came in, burned cars, torched houses, with the full support of the Israeli Defense Force, as the Arab Palestinian population just hovered. Those friends of ours are living in Hawara today. I think about the quote from Amos Oz, an Israeli novelist who in 1967, 3 months after the end of the war, wrote this really prophetic line. I have fears about the kinds of seeds we will sow in the near future in the hearts of the occupied. Even more, I have fears about the seeds that will be implanted in the hearts of the occupiers. And the first signs, 1967, are already recognizable. And of course, learning more about our own government's role in supporting the most extremist, right-wing, racist, anti-democratic government that Israel has ever known. And with that, trying to do something at our own level. Getting involved in J Street, wearing the pin here to represent, where is my pin? Oh, there it is. J Street's a progressive, pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-peace, and pro-democracy lobbying group that's working hard to help our political leaders have a backbone that's based in dignity and human rights and respect. And I'm proud to be a part of that. Also proud that, whew, I'm also proud proud that our daughter's getting a paycheck from J Street to do organizing. Anyway. So with that framing, I want to just cite a couple of examples about the United Nations and the role of the UN and in terms of Israel-Palestine and this question of stress test. I think it's more than a stress test for the UN. It's really a stress test for humanity. The UN plays an important role, but alone, they're not going to tackle this. I want to just look at three different examples, one from the founding of the State of Israel, one from the settlement, and one from the current crisis, to just give you some example of how challenging this has always been for the United Nations. You know, the UN was formed in 1945, Israel was founded, became a state in 1948. Between that time, there was the UN resolution number 181 and 47, which partitioned Palestine. 55% to Israel, 45% to the Arabs, and 3% as a UN governance of Jerusalem. That started a war. Israel then became independent in May of 1948. That started a second war, or a continuation of the war. And it wasn't until in December, the UN passed Resolution 194, which called for an immediate cessation of conflicts and acknowledgement of the right of return and compensation for those refugees who don't want to go back. It took Israel 3 times to become accepted as a member of the United Nations. That did not happen until 1949. And on the 3rd attempt, it was agreed to based on what? The status of 194 and 181, which meant that, quote, the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date, and that compensation should be paid for the property of those choosing not to return and for loss or of damage to property which, under principles of international law or in equity, should be made good by the governments of authorities responsible. Clearly, though initial membership in the UN was conditioned on the acceptance of the international status of Jerusalem and the acceptance of the right of return of the refugees, Israel never paid attention to that, to this day. Let's look at the settlements for a second. Are they illegal? Absolutely. In the Geneva Convention, Article 4 from 1949, it states that this is the protection of civilian persons in times of war. And just recently, as Nashwan mentioned, the ICJ issued an advisory opinion in July that says, quote, Israel's occupation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is unlawful. So what are the settlements? These are Israeli civilian communities, overwhelmingly inhabited by Jews, that have been built in occupied territories since 1967. There are over 127, quote, legal settlements. What does that mean if they're illegal? Well, they're legal under the views of the Israeli government. And there's over 200 illegal outposts. Over 500,000 Jewish Israelis are now living in the West Bank. How do we know they're illegal? Well, in 1967, Theodore Meron was the legal advisor for the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs before even the first settlement was built. And he wrote, quote, that yes, this is an illegal activity. Why? Because 49.6 is intended to prevent a practice adopted during the Second World War by certain powers which transferred portions of their population to occupied territories for political and racial reasons in order, as they claim, to colonize the territories. So the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs itself cited this as illegal. What was Netanyahu's reaction to the latest advisory opinion from the ICJ? He said, quote, "Jewish people are not occupiers in their own land, including in our eternal capital of Jerusalem, nor in Judea and Samaria, our historic homeland." And what was the U.S.'s response? The U.S. State Department said, "We have been clear that Israel's program of government support for settlements is both inconsistent with international law and obstructs the cause of peace." That's nice. "However, we are concerned that the breadth of the court's opinion will complicate efforts to resolve the conflict." Where's the backbone? Where's the backbone? When we look at Gaza, the horrors are almost unfathomable. And the response of the UN has been consistently rejected, to the extent that in October, Israel declared UNRWA, the organization that provides sustenance, education for refugees, formed in 1949. That organization has now been banned by Israel, period, which goes into effect in January. We still don't know what the impact of that will be. And in November, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant, along with Hamas leader Mohammed Deif, were accused of war crimes, using starvation as a weapon of war and intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population. What was the response of Israel and the U.S.? Ignored. So, what does international law actually mean, and how can it be effective? If you think of the irony of this, the laws that were created as a response to the atrocities of World War II committed on Jewish people in Eastern Europe, those same laws are the basis of the warrant of arrest of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. This is the world we are living in. I think about South Africa, where Naomi and I had the chance to live for a year, and our girls went to school there for a year. It was 2008, 14 years after what they would consider the rebirth of democracy. And schools were integrated, sort of, and signs on streets were being changed, sort of, but there was a process going on. That's still going on. Not perfect, but a process. And what was at the basis of that? A Truth and Reconciliation Commission that allowed ordinary South Africans to tell their stories and to hear others' stories. In my work over the last couple of years, I've met really courageous young Israeli Jewish citizens, young Israeli Palestinian citizens, and not always young, citizens of the West Bank. Their courage and commitment to shared society is where we need to focus. We need to raise those voices. We need to support them. We need to help our government support them. We need to see that none of these phrases really help. From the river to the sea is mouthed by both Jewish supremacists and Palestinian fundamentalists, whereas the reality is nobody is safe today who lives between the river and the sea. Safety and security is a mutual trust that needs to be built. And it will only be built through dialogue and listening to histories and taking in not just our own trauma, but each of our trauma to build a different society. Thank you.
What an awesome gift. What an awesome gift. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I understand what you meant when you said saying the river to the sea, but there's a danger young people are being arrested for saying it. So I just want you to be clear that you don't know what people mean. And people are speaking for freedom in their own land. And I don't think they should be prosecuted for using a phrase that other people apply different meaning to. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, McGregor. I use that because the first use of that phrase in the time was from the Likud party in 1983. The first time that the revisionist Zionists, what were they trying to revise? They were revising the concept of partition. Why? Because they wanted the whole gosh darn thing. When the revisionist Zionists, Zhabatinsky, who then becomes Begin, who then becomes Netanyahu, whose father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, was one of the original right-wing Zionist revisionists. They were the first ones to use that phrase. So I meant that, and I totally agree, McGregor, that that's an anti-Semitic statement. You know, you hear that a lot. And it's really troubling to me that that's even out there. And so thank you for bringing that up.
What do you think, this is what puzzles me, why the United States takes the stances it takes? And I don't know how to explain that to myself. What is our history with Israel that, I think I know it, and then I think, what is the connection that makes us as a nation not take a stance, not stand up for? When I was working towards this past election, I did some volunteering, and the youth, the students were saying to me, I can't vote for Harris because of the stance we have with Israel-Palestine. And I have no words for them, other than we have this long history with one another. I'm thinking there's something I don't get for security reasons that we keep backing Israel in their current policies. So can you enlighten me?
It's a complex question, and the answer is complex as well, and simple at the same time. If we look back, more recently it's been re-exposed what Biden had said years ago. He said, you probably recall, if we didn't have an Israel, we would have to invent one. So what does that really mean? And when they say, he says we, he's talking about the United States. And oftentimes we know that the United States, when government speaks, they're not speaking for us. We've slowly learned that over time. In my lifetime, they don't speak for me at all, obviously. So the United States took a position at some point that said their interest in the Middle East, oil, was better served for them by backing the Israeli state rather than negotiating with all of the other Arab states. Think about it. Oil is throughout the Middle East, and rather than negotiating and just being at peace with those that are providing us oil, we decided to take a contrarian stance and back an entity that was going to combat the rest of the Middle East. That's this ignorance, in my view, of going into the Middle East, using Israel as a leverage tool to be able to get America's interest. Beyond that, it's further complicated because, again, we live in a nation that has a great Jewish diaspora here and that have come from all over the world, and their affiliation, as Seth has said, with Israel, since '48, the association has been made from Judaism to Israel being one and the same. If you were Jewish, you had to also be supportive of Israel, which is not a concept that was true prior to the formation of Israel. As a matter of fact, it was opposed. The formation of Israel was opposed by many Jews throughout the world prior to the formation of Israel. It was only afterward that ideology came to be. And I'm not questioning it, because as a non-Jew, and as all of us who are non-Jews, we have to be sensitive to the imprinting of what, again, I was speaking to as the value we have of our beliefs. If it's valuable enough for me, I'm going to defend it no matter what, because it becomes part of me, my personality, my identity. So for those individuals in the United States that want to support it through Political Action Committee, AIPAC, for example, is a very strong lobbying group in the United States that's working for Israel, although not registered as a foreign lobby, but is very, very powerful. And no elected official is going to be ever elected in the United States that does not support the Israeli position. I mean, any of you who have ever witnessed any Israeli foreign dignitary coming to Congress, I'm embarrassed, as to what happens there. I mean, I'm an American and I'm embarrassed as to what I'm seeing. I understand the support of it, but these individuals are not there because they really support what this individual represents, but because they know that their own interests, their own ability to become re-elected is empowered by their ability to say, I'm with Israel. So, again, it's many, many factors that are coming together to allow the United States to be in this position, whereas in reality, the vast majority of Americans, especially after what has occurred post-October 7th, wanted to cease fire immediately, are against what's occurring there, but our elected officials will not abide by it. And they took the gamble during this last election. Harris took a gamble. And I'm not going to say that the lack of support from those that are opposing Israel in Michigan and the swing states did it. Of course, there were many factors that helped do this, but it was a deciding moment. And I think it's an eye-opening moment for us as well, as American citizens, to say, you know what, the Democratic Party is not serving us as well, and we need to change our rhetoric. Maybe we're hoping that the Democratic Party would change its rhetoric, saying, in order for us to ever be re-elected again, maybe we have to rethink our position.
There's guilt, post-Holocaust guilt, in terms of where Jewish refugees went and didn't go. That's a part of it. There is this idea that, Israel is the only democracy in the region, therefore we have to support them. That could very quickly change because Israel is quickly becoming very anti-democratic. But then really, there's this, I'm going to use the word Jewish lobby, but what I really want to call that is pro-Israel lobby. Okay? I really want to distinguish that. Why? Because research on the Jewish voter shows that support for Israel isn't even in the top 5 issues for the Jewish voter. For some reason, not for some reason, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is pushing millions and millions of dollars into campaign coffers, including election deniers from 2020, because they're pro-Israel. They're communicating the message that you need these voters and therefore you need to have this policy. And that's absolutely not true. There's a lot of donors, but the voices, J Street's research has shown that the Jewish voters are progressive, want to see a free Palestine, want to see the creation of a state of Palestine, right? Aren't just focused on the security of the state of Israel.
I want to thank you for what you noted, and I think that sort of speaks to where many of us are at with our desire to educate and understand what is really happening, and not just that, but also the history of what has happened before. And I think that we tend to look at what's happening in the news now and we start forming opinions and stances quite quickly based on what we understand is happening now without necessarily a contextual knowledge of the centuries plus long history between Israel and Palestine. And I know that speaking personally, I found myself very much wanting to learn about that and going to the internet, trying to educate myself and learn that history. And I could tell which articles were sort of trying to give me an objective historical history lesson versus those that were trying to get me to buy into a particular ideology. So for those of us that really are trying to seek a very objective understanding of what got us here, and then what do we need to do to go forward, where do we look for that? If you have any thoughts on that, how do we find that education for ourselves?
As you were speaking, I was remembering something. I had the opportunity to go to CSUMB a number of years ago and speak to the faculty, some of the faculty there. And the question came up, and I said to them that they as educators are in a difficult position. And again, this must have been 5 or 6 years ago. Are in a difficult position in the sense that their students are now doing research on papers, and they're going on Google and finding the information. And having lived through the time of the post 9/11 war on Muslims, in essence, and the disinformation that was out there, Google has an algorithm, and that algorithm will spit back the most commonly reviewed item, and it will tailor it to that individual. So when the student goes on and you punch in, is Islam, and pops up violence. And then the first 5 pages are written by individuals or organizations that are anti-Muslim. They have a purpose, and they're funded by entities that have a particular purpose. So those educators are in a quandary. Their students are now learning disinformation. And that window, it's not to say that the information is not there. Seth and I are both on a journey of understanding. My appreciation post-October 11th has grown dramatically. Is within the Jewish community and within Israel as well, even though within Israel it pretty much shut down, but in the diaspora, they are learning via these what are called new historians, new Jewish historians. These are scholars who have gone back into the archives to study what is the formation of Israel, and the narrative that has been told to them was not in fact the reality. And they're saying to their Jewish community, look, this is what the reality is. They were shunned by Israeli society, ostracized, but this is what the youth are learning today. This is what their exposure is today. So that's why you're seeing the pushback from our young people, which I want to tear up thinking about your daughter. The crossroads that we're at is this: we're not just dealing with Jews and Arabs here. We just talked about our politics. Our own country is involved here. When lobbying groups are influencing our political entity to make decisions based on a foreign government and a foreign entity, and yet undermining, we're having to pay for this, we are no longer in a democracy. We're just being given the illusion of being able to pick between 2 individuals. So we have to be careful. We have to take this seriously and utilize this Palestinian issue, Palestinian-Israeli issue, as a window of opportunity, as I said, for us to continue to educate ourselves. The information is out there, and I wished I would have brought a sheet that gives you the things, and I probably will post it, and for your benefit, I'll give it to you, Boyd, for what I have learned, and Seth will do the same. But I'm fearing that that window is closing. Our government has now just passed a new ruling, and it still has to go before the Senate. But by the way, Jimmy Panetta voted for this, in which you all are familiar by your nods, that they can revoke the non... yes.
Lofgren voted no.
Lofgren voted no.
I'm so Lofgren voted no, and she is weakening. Please pressure her more.
Yes.
She's very upset about Gaza. Please pressure Lofgren. She
Please
voted
do.
no, she's a human.
So they have the ability to shut it down. What is the rationale behind this? They will use all kinds of excuses, but the reality is to suppress opposition to what Israel is doing and it's anybody in support of Palestine. Similarly with them trying to shut down TikTok. How do we know what's been going on? The Palestinians themselves, there have been over 130 journalists, Palestinian journalists who have been killed. They're targeted specifically. And the nefariousness of how they're targeted, they don't just they know where they are via their cell phones, they know everything about them. The idea is, there is a terminology that Israel uses, where's daddy? They wait till that journalist goes home and then they bomb the home to take out the entire family. This is not by accident, this is by design. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the window of opportunity for us to be able to find truth is narrowing. I don't know what's going to happen for my generation or my children's generation. So we have to educate ourselves now so we have the opportunity to be able to resist. I'm sorry.
We'll put a list together of books we've been reading, it's been enlightening. I just wanted to mention one, which was really the first book I read that was an aha for me. It's written by Ari Shavit, who's a journalist, Israeli. It's called My Promised Land. And it's beautifully written in that he starts by describing his grandfather's arrival in Palestine. And this view of, oh, there's nothing here, it's all for us, right? And then goes on to really retell the story of various episodes of Israel-Palestinian history with dual narratives. So you'll hear the Israeli perspective, and then you'll hear what Israelis don't talk about. And it's a beautifully written book, and it's a gateway into understanding the dual narratives that really underlie this whole field.
And why did I ask Seth to join me today? It's because to me, Jewish voices are the most important. The book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who just came out with his novel, he comes out when he's speaking about his book, and he says he prefers to have Palestinian voices speaking for Palestine. I agree to a certain degree, but I also push back in saying that his voice alone, look how many of us recognize and are learning about Palestine from him, a black man's voice, or a Jewish man's voice. If you look at my list, they are all Jewish voices, Israeli and or Jewish voices. I will not need to put in any Palestinian ones in there, because they're the ones who impact us. These are the ones that are saying, not in my name, not in my country, not what I had learned before was not the reality of what I know today.
In this country, there are two parties that control all of politics in this country. And in Israel, there is no difference between them. How do we change that? The Democrats lost drastically, in my opinion, because they had no Palestinian voice in the DNC. They took every effort they could to say we are only and always about Israel. That is no different from their opponents in the Republicans. How do we change that Democratic fixture? And it all really comes down to money and support for that. What do you guys see as a path forward toward progress in that?
You know, I think there's two things. Where's the money and where are the voices? They're not always the same. The money's coming from this place of saying you better support Israel. The voices, as we see, especially from the young people, are saying no, we need a different kind of policy, right? We need to base our policy not on Israel's safety and security alone, but on the safety and security of the people of the region, and that begins with the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. Now, you can't even say those words, independent Palestinian state, in Israel today and have a serious conversation with anyone in any of the political parties. But that's not going to change until we change, because our government can have a major influence. While the political parties there are still, when you talk to Israelis, they say, oh, it's still October 7th for us. And we say, I get that, but, right? The but's only going to come when our policies change. And we need to help our leadership know, like Zoe Lofgren has been incredible.
But she's not come out against the genocide. Please, I'll be in her office Friday at 2. Join me.
Absolutely.
Look to history. The only time any change has ever happened historically in humanity is when the people rise up. That's the key. And if we look back to how South Africa handled their apartheid situation, boycott, divestment, sanction, but it needed to be global. The difficulty we have today that wasn't present during the South African change was that the powers that be have a greater hold now on internationally than they had before. Before even the United States, of course, was in opposition of the ending apartheid. So Israel was very much also opposing to it. But when enough people rose up to say no, the pressure was put on these governments where it was no longer tenable for them to continue on with it, and it collapsed. If we start boycotting those industries that continue to support this, and they're vast and very many, but we can do our role locally, plus speaking out to our elected officials. I will never forget, and I've often said this, Sam Farr, when he was in office here locally long ago, he said to me, when we would go to, Richard and I, as a matter of fact, went to his office at one time, and we were talking about this very same issue, and he said, Nashwan, look, when you come in with your 5 or 6 people, it's one thing. But when the opposing side comes in with 100 or 200 individuals, I'm an elected official who has to reflect what my constituency says. So we have numbers, but our numbers just aren't motivated enough to do anything. And you have to ask yourselves, have you done anything? And if not, join forces. Join forces with others that are willing to do it. And it doesn't take that much. They will bow down to our needs if we force them to.
So we have a question right there. No, it's a comment. 4 of us on the board of Monterey Peace and Justice Center are members of Jewish Voice for Peace. And sometimes we feel like imposters because we're not Jewish, but that doesn't matter. You can be a member of Jewish Voice for Peace. They encourage everybody to sign on, and they are working for the same things that J Street is. And so join us, it's easy.
I'm a member.
Yeah.
I was listening to you and I was thinking, who is going to be the Desmond Tutu for this?
We need to put the application out
Thank
and
you.
circulate it widely because it's really, really needed. To be honest, I can't give you names now, but I'm so inspired by the young leaders we're meeting. It's really incredible. Who have grown up in a different place, who have somehow overcome the apartheid and the separation. Palestinians don't see Israelis, don't get to know Israelis unless they're behind an M16 in full gear. What kind of relationship? But there are some, despite all that, who are working on, and that's where the new leadership is going to come
It's
from.
hard work, but it has to be done.
Yeah.
It's work.
Hi, thank you for speaking. My name is Alex. I really appreciate what I heard. I guess my question might be a little bit like advice, I think. And I appreciate your words about coming together and a lot of people coming together, especially with local government. And I have come to some moments where I feel like I have found a community and we have voiced our concerns and gone up and spoken directly to my city council and trying to pass a ceasefire resolution for the city. And it was not successful, and it was in that moment that I felt very defeated, like my actions didn't, our collective actions didn't matter, we were not being heard, and there's multiple, like you said, multiple evidence that there's a genocide going on, but many people just don't want to accept that reality. And I guess my question is, when you are put in those situations, and I think you have been put in the same situation as I, what keeps you going to find the strength, I guess, to keep at it? And especially when people keep saying, I have family, I have friends who are like, you're just wasting your time. What are you doing?
That's a good question. Jane Goodall, whom you all know, she was asked this very question by students when, not speaking about Palestine and Israel, but with regards to other issues. And they said, one of the students asked her, what gives you hope? What can give you hope? And she says the one thing that can give you hope is by joining other individuals in the work of anything. Because I think this is part of our DNA. Once we combine with one another, even if it's one other person, the incentive is there and it gives us purpose. This is part of who we are as human beings. So I would almost say let's forget about our elected officials. Why? Because we're fighting, this one, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Tyler.
I'll leave.
I didn't mean it that way. What I mean is to say they have a role to play. Their role is to represent their constituency. And when they're not pushed to that, then there's no purpose for them. They're not motivated to do it. So rather than going to them directly, my suggestion is, this is one organization, the UNA here, the United Nations Association. We have so many civic organizations within Monterey County. If we go to them, just their leaders, and just express what Seth and I have just expressed, we're all human beings. We can see the rationale to what we're talking about and how it would serve us. Those coupled with others, we will, as a group, we then approach our representatives, and they will have no choice but to recognize it. So they will be embarrassed to not be able to respond. But when we do come, as you said, on an individual level and rise up with our 10, 20 people, there's no motivation for them. So I would suggest let's band together and just start educating others within our community, because education is really the key. And the information is out there. We just have to reach out. We don't even have to read anymore. Just watch YouTube. I'm a YouTube junkie. So.
I just want to say one thing, which is follow the Rita Acosta model. There was so much energy around the creation of tents in the garden, and when that couldn't get permanent, and it was a defeat, it was not a defeat, because what happened was this group was visible, was organized, and ultimately, when a conversation began with national experts in livable, walkable communities who came here and wanted us to pull together who lives here and let's get their opinion, they said, we've never been to a community where we've met so many marginalized people who are at the table, right? There's not a us versus them, unless we just say it's business as usual, right? They're not our enemies, but they need to meet and see and listen to and feel the humanity and potential and power of the people, and that's what we just can't give up. That's what we just got to keep working and keep organizing.
Can I add and bring you back to your beginning, at the risk of not being able to express myself as well as you two have, because it's been beautiful, and you said some really important things. You also said things that were in conflict with one another, acknowledged. I'm Susan Morrison. I'm the clerk of the Quaker Monterey Peninsula Friends meeting, which, like these other organizations, are focused on peace. And one thing I'd really like to share with everybody, I think I felt my energy kind of go like this with this, is that please ask yourself, is the intensity and the anger and the being upset and being frustrated, and we felt it after the election and everything else, is it making you frame things so that there's an enemy? Because when you push so hard for a cause that you hate the other side, you're defeating your purpose. And even the Quakers among us have been so driven and so frustrated and so angry at what we see and have seen. And remember too that most of Israel is not seeing what we've seen on the news, because that's being suppressed. But we have all those things that have been mentioned. That little question that Seth answered with guilt. I felt that as East Coast boy, but knowing and growing up reading Anne Frank and every other book about the Holocaust, there's a deep, deep guilt about what the United States didn't do. It's very deep in me, and I'm sure it is in many of the others. There are all kinds of reasons for all of these feelings, and it's so complicated. That doesn't mean we don't do anything, but it means we really have to be selective. Am I doing this without creating more hate? Because we've seen that. We saw it in the student protests. We protest too. Seth and I, am even more of a baby boomer, I'm a cutting edge baby boomer. I've been at those protests. But let's just look at that of God in yourself and in others and say, am I demonizing another side?
Thank you for saying that. When I was thinking of how I'm going to be in here and in the world around this topic, feeling how hard it is to have this conversation with our own community, with our own Jewish American community, with the pain and the fear that's so deep and so right there, gentle warrior, compassionate, gentle warrior. We need to be in there, but we need to lead with compassion, but we need to stay in there, and we need to help each other hear these stories. Thanks.
Very inspiring and also very motivating. You can hear from the comments and the questions and your personal journeys. I think that's something that we all need to reflect on. You promised to send me some information, which I can circulate. We have your email addresses to you. Nashwan, you've challenged us as UN USA to be more of an advocacy on this topic. Right now, the national is very quiet. We can always try to, kick the can a little bit, and get them going. So, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming today. Please join us if you have not already. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of this day, and season's greetings to all.